Hello and welcome to the Healthy Living Podcast. I'm Joe Grumbine and I will be your host. And I've got a couple of great guests today. I've got Kevin Ruiz from Mycoalchemy and his partner, and we're going to jump right into the crazy and exciting world of mycology and mushrooms and fungi. And there's so much to explore and learn here. I'm going to jump right on into it. Give me 1 second, of course. There we go. All right. So, Kevin, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. Thank you for having us. I'm here joined with my partner, Jeremiah Bursan.
So Jeremiah, there we go.
We're excited to talk to you folks about some mushrooms and the different kinds that are out there.
So, mushrooms has become a hot topic. And first of all, I'd like to just really introduce you guys briefly. It's, how did you get into this world? Like, it's sort of a big thing now, but 5 years ago, only a handful of people were talking about mushrooms. Now everybody's talking about mushrooms. Yeah. And you guys happen to be my next door neighbors here. We happen to bump into each other and it worked out that we get along and everything's great. We got a lot in common. But what brought you to this world of mycology?
Well, you want to take this question, Jeremiah?
Sure. Yeah. So for me personally, a decade back or so, I had gone through the loss of a family member and was battling depression quite deeply for a period of time. And a friend had kind of suggested trying out mushrooms for depression treatment, because there'd been a lot of cutting edge information and studies coming out with Johns Hopkins University and such. And so I gave it a go. I said, what have I got to lose? Give it a whirl, and immediately had really great response. For me, it worked out really well. And I had found, that there were ways to use these functionally in your everyday. And it helped. It relieved the symptoms quite a bit, to the point where I was able to kind of get out of that dark space. So then I just naturally became interested in, how do I provide myself with medicine? And so growing was the natural step, and there's a lot of information online. And so I just dug in and just got down that rabbit hole, and then it kind of got into other ailments like, sleep issues and just general anxiety, even immunity. And so I dived into, reishi mushrooms, lion's mane mushrooms, all these things that have these just incredible medicinal properties. And the larger my toolkit became of supplying my own medicine, the further I went, I got into it, and so making tinctures and stuff like that became of great interest. And then COVID hit. And naturally, we're, for me and my wife, we like prefer natural medicines, right? So we studied, like, okay, what herbs could help us with viral infections. And we found out, lo and behold, actually there's not really too many plants. There are some, but not too many. But every mushroom pretty much contains antiviral properties. So then we're like, oh, well, we're in the right space, then this is perfect. And so making like tinctures and stuff like that just really took off for us, because everyone was looking for antiviral natural medicines.
That's fantastic. So, and Kevin, you were involved with Jeremiah previously, or you guys came together in this business? Or
it's funny, it kind of just happened by accident. I was in the I had different businesses going on, not too fulfilling in those. I was in the cannabis industry, and that just got really greedy and ugly towards the end there. It got almost impossible to get a license and start doing everything the right way and to actually turn it into a business. So I was kind of searching for something, and I kind of just fell into this. I personally would treat my anxiety or stress with mushrooms. I had some friends invite me on a camping trip. I was just overwhelmed with life in general, a lot of ups and downs. Stuff was really rocky, and we went on this trip and ate these mushrooms and had a really great time. And when I came back from that camping trip, I just felt like, okay, I'm ready to deal with reality. I'm ready to deal with the normal daily stresses. I felt rejuvenated. So once I made that correlation, it kind of just developed that relationship with the mushrooms. So every now and again, if I felt overwhelmed with life in general, or the daily stresses, I'd go out on this mini vacation and come back feeling well rested, almost like I really did take a vacation that I couldn't afford at the time.
Exactly.
And it kind of grew my passion. So I knew I really liked it, and I got into it, and then life happened, and I kind of lost touch with it, and I just happened to circle back, got out of the cannabis scene and was kind of getting into the mushrooms. I was trying to grow them and kind of discovered that there was a huge niche for supply companies, and the supply companies that were out there were not very professional. It was guys kind of just doing it out of their house. They weren't really operating it as an actual business, and I kind of realized the potential. And more than that, it was the potential to actually help people. It was something that I could believe in again, and that could fulfill my life. And I kind of just fell right into it. I had this warehouse, and I was buying supplies from Jeremiah's company at the time. He had another partner, and we kind of just all, formed this new company together. There was 4 of us at the beginning, and it's down to the 2 of us now. It's me and
Nice.
Jeremiah running this thing. And we've been wanting to get on your podcast to kind of spread the word, because we've realized a lot of people don't understand mushrooms. And when you think mushrooms, the first thing that comes to mind is people are like psychedelics, I'm gonna trip out.
Yeah.
They don't really think about the medicinal side or the gourmet side. If you say medicinal, people think psychedelics.
Right.
If you say gourmet, people are like, you're trying to cover up what you mean is psychedelics. And it's like, well, what we're talking about, the mushrooms you put on your pizza, like there's different types. So we felt like today would be a good opportunity to kind of get into that and help folks understand the 3 different main types of mushrooms that are out there, so that maybe if somebody's looking for some health benefits or some psychological benefits, hopefully this helps point them in the right direction. And
I love it. And I think that that's important, in the cannabis world. It's gone from, the good weed to, terpene profiles and this genetics and that, and whatever. That's a whole nother conversation. But when you get into mushrooms, most people don't know anything, and the people that think they know something probably know less than the people who know they don't know anything. And there's a handful of people, and now there's becoming more and more of it, that are actually studying this and practicing it and creating a resource of knowledge, which is why I'm so excited, because I don't know anything, and I want to learn. And for me, having these conversations is just going to strengthen my knowledge base. One of the things that, to me, the reason why I would jump into this over some other compound that's medicinal is, as far as I know, there is no lethal dose of any kind of mushrooms except for poisonous mushrooms that will kill you easily. But for a mushroom that would be considered a therapeutic mushroom or a edible mushroom, I've never heard of anybody, dying from them. Psilocybin mushrooms or reishi mushrooms or any of these other types of mushrooms. Granted, they might be hard to digest, and you might get a clogged up colon if you eat too much of something, but that's not what I'm talking about as far as toxicity. And that, to me, is what's so important. Why I work with a lot of the herbs I do is that I'm not going to screw up and kill somebody.
Right.
And is that true, or am I just making it up?
No, you're dead on with that. Yeah. I mean, they're incredibly safe medicine, natural medicine. And aside from like neurotoxins or other forms of toxins that the poisonous mushrooms have, and they're obviously, you just don't deal with those at all, right? Anything that's considered edible is at worst going to give you a bellyache.
Exactly. So I know that in compounds that have a psychedelic effect, a lot of times you're dealing with things like alkaloids or byproducts of a plant, that a plant might contain 2 sides of a coin, one part that'll help you and one part that might make you really sick if you do too much of it. Where do the poisonous mushrooms is, maybe we don't even know, but is it likely that they have some medicinal components to them as well, or do you just keep away from them?
I mean, for the most part, people just keep away from them. There are some exceptions to that. You know, the Amanita muscaria is kind of like a really obscure and surrounded by all kinds of mystical folklore and whatnot. And there are some mild toxins in that one. And so, you know, shamans and medicine women and men have special preparations for that one specifically. But again, that isn't something that's found in popular culture. That's very still traditional indigenous knowledge and held tight amongst those circles. So yeah, I'd say that off the top of my head, that's the only one that I can think of that's really kind of does have two sides of the coin. But other than that, not that I'm aware
And
of.
nobody's accidentally growing poisonous mushrooms.
Right.
I mean,
No.
Accidentally foraging them, yes.
Yeah.
right. And that's where I would say the difference is I would never wildcraft mushrooms because I don't know anything. And I know
Right.
there are some mushrooms that look like other ones that
Very much so.
are really just, people die from it every year.
Right.
So let's get into what we were talking about. You say there's 3 types of
Yes.
mushrooms.
Yeah, so there's 3 different types. The main one is gonna be actives or psychedelics. So those are the ones that have the psychoactive properties. Most people are familiar with the cubensis or psilocybin mushrooms.
Mhm.
That's the psychoactive property or chemical that they contain. So that's the terminology for that is going to be an active mushroom. And then you have gourmet mushrooms. Gourmet mushrooms are going to be the ones that the culinary industry is using. So you have stuff like the oyster
Oh,
mushroom,
it's so good.
lion's mane, and different stuff like that. And that's a gourmet. And then you have the functionals. And we were calling them medicinals for a while, but people were getting that confused with medicinal meaning psychedelic, and so there was the correlation. So now it's just become functional.
That's good. I like the idea that you're addressing an issue. Plus, if you call something medicinal, then you get caught up in FDA stuff too.
Right.
Yeah.
And you really just got to keep away from
Right.
that, even if it's true.
Yeah.
Functional's good. I like that's a great
And
term.
Functionals are great because some of them, like lion's mane, that's considered a gourmet and a functional
Mhm.
because it both has medicinal properties and it's edible. You could cook it in a variety of different
And it's
ways.
delicious.
Delicious.
Yes, and those functionals, some of the things that they could do for you is they can help regulate your insulin. So people suffering with diabetes, it helps with that. It can help lower your blood pressure. It can promote healthy brain function. It can help with your digestive tract. There's just so many different things that the functionals can do. And you know, Jeremiah's got a lot more experience than me, so I'll let him break it down. Do you want to break down some of the different psychedelics? Because there's more than just cubensis.
Yeah, I've heard recently there's, you know, when I was younger, there was 2 kinds of mushrooms. There was the magic mushrooms, the psilocybin mushrooms, and then there was the Liberty caps.
Right.
And they were the little skinny ones that just knocked you flat on your ass for a long time.
Yep.
And you had to be careful of the little ones because they just whooped your ass.
Yeah.
But we didn't know, you know, I mean, when you're a kid, you don't know if somebody sprayed something on it, if it grew that way, if there's a chemical difference between the 2, or one's
Right.
stronger, you just don't know.
Right. Yeah, and having some of those really strong responses can be kind of alarming. Especially when you don't know the inner workings of things.
Or if you're
You're like,
driving.
did I accidentally eat a poisonous mushroom? Am I
Right.
gonna be okay?
Yeah, am I gonna get
Yeah.
out of this? Or am I
Yes.
gonna be stuck here?
Yeah, so that puts you in a really challenging mental space. But there are so I'd say that there's dominantly 2 classifications to psychedelic mushrooms where and they're categorized by how they grow. You know, that's one of the main taxonomy points to categorize them is, do they grow in manure or, you know, animal waste, or do they grow on wood?
Ah,
And so you have the genus Psilocybe going across both categories. So you have the Psilocybe cubensis, which are manure based or animal waste growing mushrooms, and then you have wood based that are really kind of dominantly found in the Pacific Northwest of North America. So you have Psilocybe azurescens and Psilocybe cyanescens. And so those are wood growing species that are incredibly potent. And so those do have, again, no known lethal dose on those, but they do have some pretty intense effects. Some people call it wood paralysis.
Yeah.
Where they literally knock you out and you have a hard time.
I got stuck
motor
under a
skill
tree
function.
one time for
Yeah.
about 8 hours, and
Yep.
I couldn't get up, and as much as I wanted to, I was like, sorry,
Literally paralysis.
you're gonna be
right?
a tree for a
Yeah.
while. Sorry.
Yeah. And so that can be an alarming experience, especially for people that just aren't working with these with a guide or someone, knowledgeable that holds kind of this wheelhouse of medicine. And then so that kind of covers what's dominantly in North America. There is, as you mentioned, the Liberty caps. I'm forgetting the scientific name on those right now, unfortunately, but those are a dung-loving species, popularly known in Europe and like Australia, New Zealand, and those areas as blue meanies.
Okay.
That's kind of their nickname.
All right.
We
Yeah, I
see
could
those
see that,
references
yeah.
in like Beatles music and
Yeah,
stuff
yeah.
like that, right? The blue meanies. So the Liberty caps were a very popular one back in the day, not quite as popular or known now. Again, mostly because as they are found in North America, they're dominantly found in Europe.
Got it.
And then there's the tropical growing mushrooms that grow again dominantly on animal waste, though that can vary a little bit when you get into Mexico. Zapotecas, there's different strains in Mexico that species in Mexico that do grow on wood, but they are like very, very specialized environments. So like kind of like the cloud forests of Oaxaca.
I know where you're talking about. I
Right,
have
yeah.
a medicine woman I work with down in Jalapa.
Yeah,
and
there you go.
Amazing cloud forest and crazy
Yeah.
things grow there.
Yeah, incredible amount of medicine, both plant and fungal
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
those areas. And so Mexico's got a really rich and deep tradition of using mushrooms, both, or actually all three categories.
Mhm.
And they have incredible mushroom markets for gourmets and some of the most famous healers,
Mhm.
shamanic healers, come from or are known to be from there. And then, but when you push a little bit further south, getting back into like what's more popularly known or cultivated, there's Pinaleus cyanescens, and Pinaleus subtropicalis. So there are some subspecies within the Pinaleus genus, but those again are grown on, they're found on animal waste.
So the old story of, flip through the cow patties and you'll find something, that's not far from the truth. I mean,
No, not at all.
I know.
Not at all.
I've worked with a lot of composting and wood chips, and like you say, I'll sudden see a blossom of mushrooms pop up, and
Right.
a couple of days after a rain or whatever, when it's been damp, when the conditions are ripe, and
Right.
and I'm sure we'll talk all about that in future episodes. But so you're saying what they eat is a good way to tell
Yeah.
the type of mushroom they are.
Yeah.
Is at least some kind of a filter if you're looking at it.
Yeah, I mean, just like botanists and the plant world, anytime you're getting into taxonomy, like there's, physical characteristics that go into identification, and then also, environmental associations. And so in the mushroom world, that's what that looks like. Is it a wood-based growing mushroom, or is it a dung-based growing mushroom?
So I know that without getting too deep into you guys' business, you guys prepare medium substrate for mushrooms to grow on, and you guys work with grain. So is that considered to be wood? Is that or is that a whole nother thing?
No, that's a whole nother thing, and that's kind of a step that developed in cultivation, because normally what that would look like in the natural occurring world is like, cows or whatever animal you're talking about, but typically cows. There's the highest association with cow waste, and especially psilocybes. They're often fed grains and grasses, and so their belly creates this perfect ferment of super high carbon, high sugar medium, that as they're eating their grains and grasses, they're also eating the spores that are on those grains and grasses. And the way that their stomachs work in stages, creates that high sugar environment for the spores to germinate,
Ah.
start their life cycle, and then as they come out of the cow, they've already kind of woken up, and then they land in that patty, and it's the perfect
the
environment to foster the fruit
cow's
body growth.
digestive system's like an incubator for these mushrooms.
Yeah, it is.
Go figure, right?
We don't really think
Nature had
about
it all
that.
figured out to begin with.
Yeah, it's the perfect system for them. So I mean, the closest we can get in creating that is just using grain, but we also have different cultivation presents unique problems, right, that in nature that you're not going to run into, because like we said, that's an evolved perfect system, right? So there's a whole lot of symbiosis going on. When you're not working with a bunch of symbiosis, you're now presented with unique factors that could be detrimental to trying to grow. So that's when things have to start becoming sterilized, and the processes look more like laboratory functions than they do what's going on in nature.
Yeah, that was something that always kind of caught me off guard a little bit, is when you talk to anybody who's a cultivator of mushrooms, an actual cultivator, they, like you say, they're operated out of a lab,
right?
At least in some stages of their operation, and yet the stuff grows in cow shit or in compost that's just sitting in a pile somewhere without you doing anything. So you think to yourself, well, okay, how does one connect to the other?
Right. Yeah, and it's a lot of it, again, it's just the lack of biodiversity that you have when you're in nature. Even with like wood-loving mushrooms, a lot of them have symbiotic relationships with beneficial organisms in the soil, in the duff or the leaf litter of the forest. And so those things protect the beginning stages of the life cycle of the mushrooms. But when you're trying to recreate like any of our cultivation efforts, whether it's plants or mushrooms, when you're trying to remove one thing out of a holistic system,
you crash it.
Right. So you have to completely reimagine how to create those systems the best you can. And so far, no one that we're aware of has really tried to reproduce the holistic approach. So it's just gone full sterility, since we don't have beneficial organisms to work with. Now it's just no organisms except for the one singular organism, which is the mushroom.
Kill them all, let the one live.
Right.
Chemotherapy approach.
Right.
One really good example of that is the morels. The
Uh-huh.
morels are foraged and moving from actives over to gourmets. Morels are considered a gourmet. I know a lot of the wineries love those mushrooms. A lot of times you're going to get a cutlass pork chop or pork steak, and then they're going to have some morels chopped up on top. So you're going to see a lot of the fancy restaurants getting into the gourmets. And when we're talking about gourmets, we're not talking about your regular button mushrooms, your portobellas. A lot of those are dung lovers. Those are the stuff that likes the manure-based substrate. A lot of these gourmets are going to like a wood-based substrate. So in the wild, you're going to find them or forage them off of dead fallen trees like hardwood trees. Oak is the most common one. So for us, for people that are growing those on a commercial scale in-house or in a controlled environment, the substrate we make with that, it's a wood blend. So we get away from the manure-based soils to just a completely wood-based substrate. And that's why we call it a substrate when it comes to mushrooms versus a soil.
Right.
Because you're dealing with different amendments and different types of things.
Soil refers to a certain type of compounds and components put together in a certain way, where substrate is a lot more open. It can be kind of whatever you want it to be.
Yeah, right. And some of the main ones that you're going to find for gourmet are the oyster mushrooms. The oyster mushrooms, you got blues, yellows, pinks. They have a very meaty texture, and what's been cool about them is not only do they have health benefits to them, but they are meat substitutes. And with the vegan thing being a new movement, something that's becoming popular, it's finding a meat substitute and finding a sustainable one, because a lot of the vegan substitutes are more horrible than eating actual meat when it comes to what's going in them and how they're processing.
Everything about them is worse.
So it's really exciting to watch the gourmet version kind of really blow up and people get exposed to these new types. Lion's mane's another great one. King oyster. The king I mean, you could cook that, have it taste more like scallops or like a mushroom. So that's a really good meaty texture. That's a good meat substitute for pastas and stuff like that. It's very fulfilling. They're growing certain types of mushrooms that have big caps, and then they'll take that cap, and instead of having a beef patty, you're going to have just the cap as a replacement. And to be honest with you, hands down, best burger I've ever had was not with a beef patty.
Wow.
It was with a mushroom. It was the mushroom cap itself.
Wow.
And it holds on to all the seasons and spicings that you're putting on there. So
Right.
it's got a lot more flavor. I mean, it's like 80-90% water, so it's a very juicy texture.
Exactly.
It's nice because it tastes like you're eating something medium rare, but it's not bloody.
And you don't get the mushroom sweats.
Yeah, it's very delicious. But that's one of the ones that's been growing when we're talking about gourmets, and we're not talking about, you know, the ones you put on your pizza. That would be considered a button mushroom. But the oysters, the kings, and going back to my what I was originally saying was the morels. He was talking about symbiotic relationships.
Right.
The morels, they barely started growing them in a controlled environment, and they failed numerous times with numerous different attempts. And the way there's one science group doing it, and they actually had to find the native grass that was growing alongside with morel. So they have these open trays where that native grass is growing with the morel, and they have formed a symbiotic relationship.
Figured out the missing piece to
it. And you know, like he said, plugging in different places of what you're taking out of that holistic system in a controlled environment and making the changes. And that's one of the cool things that they started doing. So that's new. For right now, you still have to forage those, and it's quite an expensive gourmet mushroom.
Yeah.
But do you want to talk more about the scientists? I mean, I was actually learning that from Jeremiah.
Nice.
Yeah, you know, and one guy that I consider a mentor, who I learned most of the stuff I know from, just his books. I've never met him in person. I wish one day. Trag Cotter, though, he was a microbiologist before getting into mycology, and he kind of cracked the code, and then the science group in, I believe it's in Denmark, really took it all the way. But he recognized that there was a microbial relationship that was absolutely necessary for the mushrooms to produce fruiting bodies, and without those microbes present, they would not fruit. And so that's what this Denmark group has essentially recreated: micro ecosystems, or having enough of the right biomass that will foster those microbial populations that the mushrooms need to fruit. And so Trag Cotter kind of, like I said, cracked the code initially on this by going to sites where these mushrooms are growing, specifically that have these absolutely necessary symbiotic relationships with microbes. And he was actually taking handfuls of dirt from right where the mushrooms were growing, and bringing them back to his lab, this handful of dirt, and making these slurries and doing this assessments on what the microbial populations were. And so he was able to kind of start narrowing it down. And I mean, initially just trying to figure out what the heck's going on. And then as he saw micro populations growing in his petri dishes and whatnot, he was able to assess that, it's actually a microbial relationship that these need. It's not like it's lacking something in the soil as far as like a carbon component, or
it's a companion.
It's actually a microbial relationship. So then he was able to kind of reproduce these slurries of microbes that are beneficial, and introduce those into the growing environment with the mushrooms, and boom, they started growing. But obviously, if you were talking about, you know, commercial production, that would be a wild cost. You'd have to have a very accomplished microbiologist on your team.
I can imagine though in the future that this will become commercially viable. I mean, you know, we're probably a ways away, but man, you guys are probably in a sweet spot for that. As technology is developing, you've already building your knowledge and your infrastructure. So I would say I think you guys came into a good place at a good time.
Good timing, yeah.
And I got to tell you, we're just about out of time here, but this is fascinating, and I'm hoping you guys can come on. I've got a million more questions about a million more things, and I think we can talk for a good long while. But
looking forward to it.
I one little question just popped into my head, and I don't hear a lot of people talking about them, but how do truffles fit into this? Because they're a fungus, but they're not a mushroom, right?
Right, yeah, so truffles are what they call a sclerotia, and that's a special body. The function of that is still to be determined 100%, but what scientists are debating or leaning towards is that the sclerotia body is actually a kind of a survival technique for certain mushrooms, and there's quite a few mushrooms, actually psychedelic mushrooms as well, that produce truffle bodies. And what it is it's the mycelium underground, so not above ground. It's not a fruiting body, like as you said, it's the mycelium massing underground and creating a mass of mycelium, but it also pumps that mass full of nutrients and water, and so it's a reserve system. So it's they're thinking that it's in places where mushrooms grow that tend to go through like droughts or dry hot seasons. So like this, our environment even here would be kind of those factors. And so the mushroom stores up what it needs to get through those hotter seasons or those unfavorable conditions, and then when favorable conditions come around, it now has these little storehouses of nutrients and food and water that it needs to continue on. So it's essentially they're thinking that it's a survival technique. But when the mycelium creates these sclerosias, like I said, it packs it with all its goods, and so it produces just really robust flavors.
Oh man, this
so that's why,
teeny shred will go a long way.
So that's why they're so highly sought after, right? Because they're just incredibly packed with not only nutrients but flavor. And
amazing. Well, listen, we're about out of time. Like I said, I've got a lot to future episodes. We could probably do a bunch of them. But I'd like to give the last moment for you guys to give a little shout out, a plug, or how would somebody get a hold of you if they want to reach you?
Thank you for that. Well, so we do have our website, which is www.myco-alchemy.com. And then we're pretty active on Instagram, of course, right? Which you could find us at Mycoalchemy with an underscore at the end. We're really active on that. So if anyone's on Instagram or socials, go ahead and follow us and connect with us there. Shoot us a message. Or we're kind of old-fashioned guys where we love phone calls. We love talking to people. If someone wants to give us a call and just talk about mushrooms or is curious about cultivation and needs a little guidance, hit us direct at the phone line. We're 951-261-1115.
Fantastic. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Absolutely. Likewise. Thank you.
All right. Take care now.